Well, you're starting a series on Jesus and politics. Um, I don't like know what the high school culture is for political engagement. All I know is your parents and your grandparents get pretty ramped up about the whole thing. And I don't know whether you watch the news or how engaged you are, how familiar you are with the idea of Republicans or Democrats or tax reform or welfare code, or I don't know where you're at. I just know that in our nation, uh, the political divide, I'm 58 years old, it's worse than it's ever been. Everyone's angry at everybody, and I am arguing and hoping for some what we call civility. Civility is just a respect and a kindness for people, even if you disagree with them. So we're going to walk through part one. I don't know what's coming on the next weeks here, but I want to share primarily about a few words. So one word I want to talk about is patriotism. Another word I want to talk about tonight is nationalism. And then I want to kind of a twist on that, Christian nationalism. And I want to just begin to explore with you what it means to be a Christian and patriotic or nationalistic or whatever. Like, how do we engage with the political world as Christians? So, if I say the words, I pledge allegiance, I think most of you go to the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. You've spoken that pledge. We call it the Pledge of Allegiance, and it says, I pledge allegiance to the flag, and we all know that we're really pledging allegiance to the country that the flag represents. We understand that, but there's a pledge of allegiance. A pledge is a promise, and allegiance is loyalty. And so when we pledge allegiance to something, we're promising our loyalty, our devotion, our hearts. Actually, we pledge allegiance to dozens and dozens and dozens of things. It's just on a scale. So you all pledge allegiance to an iPhone or an Android. You pledge allegiance to a shoe brand. Some of you are Nike. I've run some marathons, and I long ago pledged allegiance to Brooks Ghost is my running shoe. I started with the 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I'm loyal to a running shoe. I won't buy any other shoe. Some of you ladies, you have pledged allegiance to a makeup brand. Like, it's always that brand at that store. We pledge allegiance to a restaurant. I like the Chiefs. A bunch of us have pledged allegiance to the Kansas City Chiefs or to Northwest or Eisenhower or wherever you go to Mays, or, don't make any snarky comments about anything. We're being civil, right? But like, you pledge allegiance to all kinds of things. And St. Augustine, so he lived way back in 400 AD, so 1900 years ago. Drop this quote up on the screen. He said this: living a just and holy life. So that's living a good life, a rightly lived life. Living a just and holy life requires one to be capable of an objective and impartial evaluation of things. So to live a good life, a right life, you have to be able to objectively, that means without bias, evaluate things in your life. Like, evaluate, and here it is, to love things in the right order. I love that. I mean, I love my Brooks running shoes. I love pizza. I love my wife. I love my grandkids. I love the Chiefs. I love my grandma, okay? We use the same word for all kinds of things, but those are in a pecking order. So I love my wife a lot more than my Brooks running shoes. It's a pecking order. And living a good life requires us to prioritize our loves or allegiances. So the question that we're starting out with in this series is, where is allegiance to a nation on the pecking order for Christians? Like, where is it? Is it above or below your allegiance to the Chiefs or your makeup brand or your shoe brand or your school? Where is allegiance to nation, right? Is there a specific spot? How do we begin to prioritize? Patriotism is the first word I want to try and define. Patriotism is love for one's country or devotion to one's country. So someone who goes off in the military and serves in the Marines for 20 years, they're a patriot, okay? That means they had a devotion to the United States. They had a love for, okay? But this can be on a scale, right? You can be a 1 or a 5 or a 10. So the question is, what does the Bible say about patriotism to a nation? So are there any Bible verses that say you should be devoted to the country you live in? You should love the country that you live in. Now, when I talk this evening about patriotism and nationalism, take off your American hat. What I say here about Christians in America, where is patriotism on the scale, of allegiance? You should be able to say the same thing to people, Indonesians, Germans, people in Burundi, Africa. So take off your American hat. We're saying, regardless of what country you're from, how do you find out what the Bible says about patriotism, okay? So the short answer is, are you ready for this? There are no verses in the Bible that I've found, and if you can find one, let me know. But there are no verses in the Bible that I've found that tell Christians in Burundi, Christians in Germany, Christians in Indonesia, Christians in America to love their country or be devoted to their country. There's just not a verse that calls Christians to be patriotic. Now, having said that, I believe that there is a place for healthy patriotism. And I want to explain why I believe that, okay? So, in Psalm 139, it says in verse 16, "Your eyes saw my unformed body." Your eyes saw me when I was formless. All my days were written in your book and planned before a single one of them began. Now, I'm on my way to defending for you why I believe that a healthy patriotism is a good thing, even though there's not a single verse that I've found that says, "Thou shalt love thy country, thou shalt be devoted to thy country." There are no verses like that. But step number one is Psalm 139. You are not an accident. God formed you. He has a purpose for you. He has ordained your days. Now just hold on to that thought. The next one is Acts 17. And here the great first century pastor and missionary Paul was in Athens, Greece. And in verse 26, he says this, "From one man," and some thinks that's Jesus, but I think it's Adam, okay? But regardless, but from one man, let's just go with Adam, God made every nationality. Now, the New Testament was written in Greek, and the one word nationality is two Greek words. Ethnos, we get ethnic from that, and anthropon, man, okay? Every nationality was made to live. God made every nationality to live over the whole earth. Listen to this, and has determined their appointed times and boundaries where they should live. Not only did God give you a purpose, He formed you in your mother's womb. He ordained your days. He has a reason for your existence. You are not an accident, right? You are on purpose. Second thing, this on purpose, He actually destined you to be born in America if you were born here. I don't know if we have exchange students or people who are born outside, but you were chosen on purpose. That's what it says here. God made every nationality to live over the whole earth and has determined their appointed times and the boundaries of where they live. God placed me in the United States of America. He placed other people in Indonesia and Burundi and Germany, okay? So you were made on purpose. God even placed you in the nation that he placed you on purpose, okay? Then, Matthew 22, it tells us to love our neighbor. Matthew 5 says to let our light shine, and to point people to Jesus. So, my belief is that you cannot adequately honor God's sovereign creation of you, his placement of you in this nation, his call for you to love the people of that nation and to point them to Jesus, and in that country hate it or hate that country. The only way I can fulfill the destiny of what God has done by placing me here is for me to love my nation, okay? Now again, I'm admitting that I haven't found a single verse that says Christians in Burundi should love and be devoted to their country. And I'll get to a reason why a little better. But I do believe that we ought to have a healthy love for the country that God has placed us in, because that honors why God put us here, okay? I spent my junior high and high school years in Indonesia. I was there from 1975 to 81. And Indonesia, it's a string of islands above Australia. It's on the other side of the world. It gained its independence in 1945. So I got there in 75 as a kid your age. 30 years. America is 245 years old. So it was a young country. And I loved Indonesia. It was the greatest thing for me. And God got a hold of my heart there up in the rainforests on these remote areas on the islands of Java. But I remember every Independence Day in August, I would ride around in the back of a pickup of my Muslim friend across the street, because all my friends were Muslims. And we had a group of boys in the back of the pickup, and we didn't wear seatbelts back then, and I turned out all right, okay? But we're lighting firecrackers, and there's this beautiful red over white Indonesian flag flying everywhere, and I remember just every year having this surge of patriotism, like love for Indonesia. And I'm a junior high schooler, and I love that country. My heart had been captured. I was loyal to it. I wanted its success. I loved the people. I loved the culture. I loved the country. I rode everywhere on motorcycle, and they had this Independence flame, and I rode around it. It's 450 feet tall. It's just it's in the center of Jakarta, now a city of 30 plus million people. It was a small town of 10 million when I was there. Okay, Kansas has 3.5 million. All right, so it's this huge city, but in the center of it is this freedom flame, this tower, and it's the landmark of Indonesia's independence. And I just had this loyalty to that country. And one of the things it did for me was it reminded me that God is above any nation. He is not preferential to a particular nation, and that the country he places you in is the country you should love. Because when you love the country and you love the people, you have a fighting chance to point them to Jesus. And so I do believe that because we're called to be a light, because we're called to love our neighbor, and because God has placed us in the place he's placed us on purpose, and he gave us a purpose, Psalm 139, that we really should have a a level of patriotism. The question is, where is the line where you have too much love for your country? Right? That line may be nationalism, and that's the second word. So nationalism is exalting one nation above all others. Okay? It is exalting one nation above all others and placing primary emphasis on promotion of its culture and interests. Perhaps the most stark example of nationalism is North Korea. You've heard about North Korea, right? Their despot, I can never pronounce his name, the goon that's in charge, right? He is oppressing that country, but he has brainwashed those people, right, into this blind belief that they are a superior race, a superior people, that they are the greatest nation. I understand how there's a place for every Christian in every nation. I mean, my Indonesian friends, they believe that Indonesia was the greatest nation on earth. So there's a place for that. I understand that. We think America's the greatest nation. I think the Germans think that Germany is the greatest nation. So my point is, nationalism really elevates this, and it says, we are better than you, and we are the greatest nation. And there's a line, and it's hard to know where the line from patriotism and an appropriate loyalty to the country God has put you in, where that line shifts to nationalism, okay? John 18. So Jesus is on trial, and Pilate asks him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And Jesus says, "No, my kingdom, my nation, isn't of this world. If it were, I would be calling my servants to fight so that I wouldn't be crucified and I could set up an earthly nation. But my kingdom is not of this world." Jesus had every opportunity to take over Israel, become their king, and raise that as the nation above all other nations. He said, "That's not my agenda. I am not into the political world. My kingdom is not of this world." He had every opportunity to be nationalistic and, what do we say, preferential to a specific country, and he chose not to. There's also what's called American Christian nationalism. And just a comment about this. This says that exalting America, and there are people out there who believe that the Bible addresses America as a special country with a special place. And I think that's heresy. I think it's just flat out wrong. God is not preferential to a nation, but American Christian nationalism says America as a Christian nation is above all other nations, and these nationalists promote Christian culture above all others, okay? 10 months ago, on January 6th, a bunch of people stormed the Capitol. And there were people going in there with American flags and Christian flags, with Bible verses, holding the Bible, storming the Capitol. And they were doing what Jesus said we shouldn't do. They were trying to join two kingdoms, the kingdom of America with the kingdom of God. And you don't do that. You just don't do that. In John 18, Jesus said, "That's not where I'm at. I am not joining America and, my kingdom. My kingdom is not of this world." Jesus said, Matthew 6:33, "Seek first the kingdom of God." Peter calls us strangers and temporary residents here. In Ephesians 2:19, it calls us fellow citizens, members of God's household. Philippians 3:20, our citizenship is in heaven. So let me wrap it up here. I really like how our Mennonite brethren, that's our denomination, Confession of Faith, puts it. I'm just going to read out of it's kind of every denomination has kind of a doctrinal statement, and this is part of that. God has given governments authority to maintain law and order and to punish wrongdoers. Followers of Christ respect and pray for those in authority so that peaceful order may prevail. The primary allegiance of all Christians is to Christ's kingdom, not the state, not the society. Because their citizenship, and if you're a follower of Christ, you got a mailing address here in Wichita or Goddard or wherever, right? You got a mailing, but your permanent mailing address is in heaven, right? And that's what this says, that because their citizenship is in heaven, Christians are called to resist, hear this, the idolatrous temptation to give the state devotion that is owed to God. Our highest devotion is owed to God. So when we say, I pledge allegiance to the flag, that's fine. But put it down on the pecking order. When you say, I pledge allegiance to Nike shoes or Brooks shoes or that restaurant or that school or that football team, when you say, I pledge allegiance to my wife or my mom or my dad or my friend, I pledge allegiance to Axis, I pledge allegiance to Ridge Point Church, I pledge allegiance to that college that I've applied for. When you put these pledges of allegiance to dozens of things, your life will succeed in God's eyes when you put them in the right pecking order. Here's the problem. There's no one that's going to be able to tell you where should your allegiance to shoes and your allegiance to restaurants and your allegiance to go. I mean, you got to wade your way through that mess. Always asking God, what is the right way for me to pledge my allegiances? The only thing we know for sure is that pledging your allegiance to a nation is never commanded. The only thing we know for sure is that our allegiance as Christians, far and away, should be God and people above everything else. So order your allegiances, all right? Kyle, do we have any questions or anything about politics? This is where I wanted to go this evening. All right.
Yeah, throw that slide up there. So if you, we're going to do just a Q&A whenever Brent kind of teaches and whatnot. So go ahead and throw that slide back up there. You can go to the website. It's anonymous on there, askhonest.com/access. I'll get it up here. It's anonymous. You have no idea. We have no idea who asked it, but then Brent will have a chance to answer it. So really quick, while we're waiting for the first question, what did you do on your sabbatical, if you remember a couple years ago?
That was more than a couple years ago. I read like 6 books. I visited 6 different churches. I only hear one preacher, and he's a dud on some Sundays, like me. Like, I listen to podcasts and stuff, but part of growing as a leader, so I went to half a dozen churches, I read half a dozen books, did some thinking and praying, and I decompressed. It was a blessing. Kyle didn't say this. I think the devil puts a different target on church leaders than he does a lot of other people. I know that sounds selfish, but I honestly believe that if he wants to take down a public school teacher and she gets burned out, yeah, that's too bad. But the kingdom of God really suffers when a pastor falls or fails or wears out. And if he's going to take someone out, he wants to take out church leaders. And I'm glad Kyle's taken this. I'm glad we have this. It's a privilege because most of the world can't take a sabbatical. But most of the world doesn't face the spiritual onslaught that we do. And I don't mean that as, woe is me. Like, this is how it works. The devil is hell-bent on destroying the church. And so he's hell-bent on destroying leaders. So it was good.
Okay. Thank you.
Read
No, that's
books,
good.
And I also defended it for you.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Okay.
So you're going to have to go really quick because there's a lot of good ones.
Okay.
We're going to start with, what should Christian stance, what should our stance as Christians be on a political nation of Israel?
Oh, that's a hard one. I'm a fence rider on that. That is one of the areas that I feel, and I've always been underprepared. I've studied it. I still don't understand it. So for those of you who don't know what's behind the question, there are many who believe, and there are verses that hint at this, that Israel has a special place in end times in the Bible. And that's partly why in American politics we're, promoters of Israel. On the other hand, I just don't buy into it as strong as some. So I'm a fence rider. I think, yeah, it's got a special place, but I don't know what that is. And sometimes I think people are overdoing that. So I don't know is the answer.
Okay. So this is not political related, but they want to know, who is your barber?
My wife, every 2 weeks, she just shaves it. Now, I want to bick my head, like shave it, but my wife says I have a poorly shaped head. And so evidently in the fine print of our vows, I couldn't bick it, shave it, but every 2 weeks.
I like that sound. All right.
Yeah.
Is it okay for us to bring our Christian values into our government, or should we allow our government to conform to other moral compasses in order to keep social peace?
So every law, I put every in air quotes, every law legislates morality. It's just whose morality it legislates. So rape is a crime in America because we decided, well, God decided it was wrong, but we legislated a law to say that you are going to be punished for that because that's a moral issue. Theft, all these laws we have are legislating morality. So the question is, since we live in a republic or a democratic nation where we have a say, my answer would be yes, absolutely. Every other law is legislating morality, and there are people who think that tax evasion is not wrong. Well, it's still a law. And so if you look at the hot buttons like abortion, I'm not out there advocating for overturning Roe v. Wade. But on the other hand, that law that allows abortion is legislating, it's promoting a morality. It's just someone else's morality. And so as God lays passion on you, sure, I think we ought to try to legislate morality. That's what all the other laws do.
All right, well, 2 more questions. One, this just says, you lived in many states. Which state is the best?
Kansas.
In the United States, okay.
And I've only lived in 3.
Okay.
California, Oklahoma, and Kansas. California is way overrated. They're just a bunch of quacks out there. One of these days, it's just going to fall off, and no one will miss them.
Okay, so...
Joking, just joking.
Yeah, you're going to clarify that.
Harsh crowd.
Next week, we're going to be talking about how should Christians be involved in government. Should they vote, not vote, all that stuff. So we're going to go over that next week. But there is a question that keeps coming up, and Schmidt's Garden has asked it 10 times, okay? So is there one political party more correct than the other?
All the Democrats would say that the Democrats are more correct. The Republicans would say they're more correct, okay? So I guess people say yes. You asked the question, I'm a Republican, and there are parts of the Republican platform. So when you say the Democratic platform or the Republican platform, you can Google this, and they'll have a long, long list of where they stand on issues, okay? And there are parts of the Republican platform that I don't agree with, and there are parts of the Democratic platform that I do agree with. Historically, the Democrats have, I'm going to use some words here, done better at caring for the poor, the disenfranchised. Historically, they've been known as, promoting the welfare system and helping the poverty and immigration and opening the gates and all that. So part of the good part is what I'd like to just think is the good intention of Democrats to care for the down and the out. historically, the Republicans have stood for moral stuff like pro-life and pro-historical marriage, like husband-wife marriage. So these have been historically the defining separation. Now, what's come on recently is the immigration issue, which has really separated the two parties, okay? I think another one that's separating, I don't know how to say this one. It's not the racism issue, but it's how that's spun. And so Republicans have tended to be a little more skeptical of the Black Lives Matters and the protests, and the Democrats have been pro that. And so the racism issue has also separated them. But I'm Protestant because I don't agree with a bunch of the Catholic. I'm Mennonite Brethren because I don't agree with a bunch of the Methodist view or whatever. And I'm Republican or Democrat because I believe it's right. And so is there one that's right? There are some parts of the Republican Party platform that are more God-honoring than the Democrat platform. But I believe there are some parts of the Democratic platform that are more honoring to God than a Republican. Neither party hits the target 100%, okay? Where you end up is, as I have, saying, my personal understanding of the right way to order my life is better represented by this party than this. And so I register as that.
So what we're going to be doing next week is kind of going over taking the foundation that Pastor Brent here laid tonight and talking about, okay, I'm going to be 18 soon. I'm going to be an adult soon that will have the ability to vote. What does that look like as a believer, as someone who's interacting with this world? And so we're going to be kind of going over those questions in more detail next week in that. So right now, what we're going to do is we're going to head off into small groups. So if you don't know where small groups is, come up here, come talk to me. But go ahead and stand up, take your stuff with you, and we're going to have this discussion kind of continue on, especially with our mock election we did earlier, on politics of Jesus, kingdom principles. What does that look like? Priorities, nationalism, all that in your small groups. So go ahead and head to your small groups and come up here if you have any questions.